Alexander. We are live to talk about Brexit. Do you guys hear me okay? If you hear me okay, let me know in the chat. And we have 48 people waiting. Can you guys hear us? Let me know if you hear me. Alexander, how are you doing? Say something to all the people waiting for your insight on what was a crazy day.
An absolutely crazy day, Alex. I mean, it's difficult to convey how mad the situation in Britain has become. I mean, I am living in a country which is like, the Alice through the looking glass country, where, you pass through the mirror and all sorts of crazy things happen, and you meet jabberwockies and jub birds and cats with Cheshire cats. I mean, it's become an absolute asylum where the lunatics are now in charge. I mean, the House of Commons today, it was just bizarre, and it's difficult to convey to those who who are not part of this situation how weird it all looks now. I mean, it's become so odd. I mean, we have a prime minister who I think is completely, in another planet. We have a House of Commons that's now terrified of the voters and is caught between what it wants and what it's afraid the voters want. We've got a public that's incredibly angry, and we've got a media which has just lost the plot entirely. I mean, we are in a very weird situation in Britain. Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. I think everyone hears us fine. Everyone says hello to you, Alexander. And I think everyone is ready to discuss Brexit. So let's jump into it. Alexander, I'm going to read you a BBC headline. Let me pull it up on screen here. And let's see. It's a simple one, Alexander. Brexit MPs reject May's EU withdrawal agreement. That is the headline on the BBC. I think that was the headline on just about every major publication that went out today after the vote was finished. So Alexander, May lost for a third time.
Yes.
What does that mean?
Yes. Yeah, and she lost by a bigger margin than I think
58
most people
votes
expected. 58.
Correct?
Exactly. I mean, most people thought that she'd be able to drill it down to about 25, but the actual number was 58, with 34 Conservative MPs who are clearly the ultras refusing under any circumstances to back their deal. They are right, by the way. I think that they did completely right to take that stand, and with very, very few Labour MPs prepared to support her either. So she lost by any general would be considered a big. I mean, once upon a time, 58 votes would have been considered a big blow for a government. I mean, obviously, it's less than the 230 votes that she lost, in January, and of the 149 votes that she lost a few weeks ago. But I don't personally think that she's going to be able to get this figure down any further. And that I say that because though Theresa May was giving hints yesterday that she was about to resign and was saying that she would resign if a deal was passed, she's now saying that she's going to carry on. And there's talk apparently amongst her officials that she's going to propose this wretched deal again to Parliament for a fourth time. Now, you think about that, Alex. Theresa May said that she would go if she won, but says that she's going to stay because she lost. Does that make any sense to you? It doesn't make any sense to me. But that is only just one of the things that I think shows what an absolutely surreal, upside-down world we have in Britain now.
All right. Harry is tuning in from Melbourne, 5 a.m. All right. Thank you for getting up early to catch this Brexit update. Yeah, it's absolutely insane, Alexander. I've been saying it all along with my very limited knowledge of UK politics. And most of
Mm,
the knowledge that I've obtained has been from listening to you this past couple of these past 2 3 months, I'd say, since we've
mm,
been covering Brexit. Pretty dedicated on this channel. My whole thing is
mm,
the vote was very straightforward. It was get out of the EU. They had the no deal, WTO terms. They had plenty of time to get their house in order. 2 years plus to get their house in order. You know, the civil service, get the
3 years.
3 years.
3 years.
Okay,
three
three
years
years.
since the referendum in June. We're now in April, so they've had ample time to sort it out and to get on top of this thing, and we're now 2 weeks away. 2 weeks away, and nothing's been done.
Yeah,
I mean, it's incredible, actually. Yeah.
and nothing's been done. And we've reached a point now where, to me, I've lived it in Greece. I've lived it in Cyprus.
Mm.
I've seen what the EU does. I've seen the games. My gut feeling tells me, as much as my heart would like to tell me that the UK is going to break away from the
Mm.
chains of the European Union, my gut is telling me, Alexander, that everyone is searching. May, the MPs, Juncker, Tusk, everyone in Brussels, they're Merkel, they're all trying to find a way to keep the UK inside the EU while pretty much pulling a fast one on all the people. In other words, catch every UK citizen asleep at the wheel. That's the game that I think the elites are playing right now, and they just don't know how to get around it. They're trying to be clever, trying to figure out a way. How do we keep the UK in the EU without pissing off all the people that voted leave?
I think that's a very insightful analysis because can I just say what I think is going to happen now? I mean, first of all, in theory, on the 12th of April, unless the British come up with a new proposal, Britain leaves the EU without a deal and it then has to trade on WTO terms. I have to say, I don't expect that to happen. I think there's going to be every conceivable attempt over the next few weeks, just as you said, to come up with some way of getting round that. Either that will be through a proposal for a customs union that will emerge out of a second round of indicative votes that are going to happen on Monday, or it's going to happen because Theresa May is going to put this deal of her, oh sorry, Theresa May is going to put this deal of hers to the House of Commons for a fourth
Four.
time next week, fourth, and to be very clear, this deal does keep Britain in a customs union with the EU. I mean, there have been various proposals made, all of which are supposed to be different from Theresa May's, and which were discussed by the House of Commons on Wednesday, and are going to be discussed by the House of Commons again on Monday. They're not actually, when you really drill into it, that different. But I think the other possibility, and I think it's a very real one, though there are many, many reasons why it might not happen, is that we could be seeing the way towards a general election. In other words, there will be perhaps a fourth attempt to pass this deal. That will fail. Jeremy Corbyn will then call a vote of no confidence. That will pass. Theresa May will then call a general election. She has then said in the past that she will not lead the Conservatives in a general election. She promised them that back in December when she faced down a challenge to her leadership. I predict that if there is a general election called, she will break that promise. She has broken virtually every other promise she has made, both to her party and to Parliament and to the British people. And I think she will go to Brussels and say to them, we now have a general election in Britain. Can you please give us a long extension, that's at least a year, perhaps even 2 years, so that we have this general election out of the way. A new government then takes over, which will then come back with whatever proposal it wants to put forward. Now, if that election results in a Labour victory, Jeremy Corbyn will come to the EU. make some sort of proposal which will differ in some details to Theresa May's proposal, I predict that the EU will reject that proposal because from their point of view, the deal that Theresa May has negotiated is the optimal one because it keeps Britain in effect within the customs union with no exit because of the backstop. So I don't see why they should agree to a deal that Jeremy Corbyn puts forward, which is less good than the one Theresa May has agreed with them. And they will say to Jeremy Corbyn, look, if you don't like Theresa May's deal, you've yourself ruled out and will have campaigned on a policy that there must be a no deal Brexit cannot happen under any circumstances, in which case, since we're not accepting your proposal, and you're not accepting Theresa May's proposal, and you're not prepared to have a no deal Brexit, your only option is to revoke Article 50 and stay in the EU and cancel the referendum. So that, I think, is where we're probably heading.
So your hunch is that the general election will eventually lead to a Labour government, which will lead to Corbyn eventually revoking Article 50.
Yes, I think that is the most likely outcome, because I have to say that the Conservative Party is in no position to win a general election. Theresa May has no. If Theresa May leads the Conservatives into the general election, she will have broken her promise. There'll be great unhappiness with her leadership across the Conservative Party. I'm putting it mildly. The real feelings most Conservatives have about her are far, far stronger. And I cannot see how she can lead the Conservatives to victory. The alternative, which is that Theresa May makes way and is replaced by someone else, begs the question of who else. If it's Boris Johnson or Michael Gove, the two strongest Leave candidates, who, by the way, did not do well out of the vote today, we'll come to that shortly, then I predict that the Remainers in the Conservative Party will not accept it, and there will be a crisis in the Conservative Party. If it is another Remainer like Theresa May, someone like David Livingstone perhaps, or Amber Rudd, the Leavers won't accept it. So either we have the Conservatives led by a discredited leader, who is Theresa May, or we will have the Conservatives going into the election led by a divided leader and themselves obviously divided. So they will go down to a heavy defeat. But I think there are some Conservatives who calculate that from their point of view, that is a better outcome because it relieves them of the responsibility of revoking Article 50 and cancelling Brexit. So they can put the blame for doing that on Jeremy Corbyn as Prime Minister and say to the British people, it's nothing to do with us.
All right, let's take a step back, and I want you to walk us through what happened today, Alexander, and just take all our viewers through what was the outcome that happened today during the votes. And to kick it off, Alexander, there's a super chat that relates to this, and it's from Elaine at the beach. It says, total shambles. Why do you think Rees-Mogg and Boris Johnson voted for May's deal today? So with that question in mind, walk us through everything that happened today.
Yes. Can I actually deal with that question?
Yeah,
now, I have never been, as our viewers know, I have never been an admirer of Boris Johnson. I consider him an opportunist, and I've always had I've been always much more critical, or at least less enthusiastic, about Jacob Rees-Mogg than many of our viewers have been. And I think today we saw why. Because let me repeat again, the only honest position for someone who supports Brexit to take would have been to vote against this deal, even if that risks cancelling Brexit entirely. Better have no Brexit than a fake Brexit, which is what this deal would have ended up providing. Boris Johnson went along with it because I think he calculates that if he held out against the deal even further, it would antagonize some of the soft Brexit feeling amongst the Conservative Parliamentary Party and put in jeopardy his position, his prospects of succeeding Theresa May as Prime Minister, which I think for Boris Johnson has always been his primary objective. Whereas in Jacob Rees-Mogg's case, I just don't think that he has the political weight and the political nous that many people think he has. I just don't think that he read the rooms properly, just as I don't think he read the situation properly back in December when he triggered a leadership contest, or tried to trigger a leadership contest against Theresa May, which turned out to be premature. I think people overestimate Jacob Rees-Mogg, and I think they misunderstand Boris Johnson. So that's those two things. Now let's take us through.
Let's walk it back.
This utterly bizarre vote today. And just to understand how bizarre this vote was, Theresa May had to get round the ruling of the Speaker, that's John Bercow, which said that she cannot put this same proposal to the House of Commons a third time unless it was substantially changed. Now, she cannot change it substantially. So what she did is she proposed the withdrawal part, the withdrawal agreement. The deal comes in two parts. There's a political declaration, which is not legally binding, and a withdrawal agreement, which would be legally binding. So she's dropped the political declaration, which she said is not politically binding, just put forward the withdrawal agreement, which would be politically binding, and saying that that is a substantial change. And then she also said that though this was going to be a vote today, it was not going to be a legally binding vote. In other words, it was not going to be a meaningful vote. So in theory, it was only supposed to be a consultative vote, though it would have been one which she would have considered herself bound by. Now, if that sounds like a parliamentary trick, it was. That's exactly what it was. So we had this very, very bizarre motion put to the House of Commons, which lots and lots and lots of people didn't understand. And then it resulted in this very weird debate. And one has to follow parliamentary debates carefully to understand how weird it was, to just get a sense of it. I mean, we had people like Dominic Raab, who was one of the hardline Brexiters who previously had said that they would not accept this deal because it would make Britain a vassal state, coming along and saying that he'd vote for it, even though it would make Britain a vassal state. We had the leader of this new party, one of the leaders of this new party, Sowbury. I should say that this group that broke away from the Labour and Conservative parties, this new centrist group, and she announced that it was going to be called Change.org, this new party. It's actually
very original.
Well, it changed, and in fact, she got the name wrong. I mean, it's not change.org, it's change.uk, or I might have got it the wrong way around. But anyway, she didn't even know the name of her own party. We got somebody, another MP, saying, that criticising someone for criticising one of the ministers for dancing on a head of a pin, so that they could produce a fig leaf. I mean, utterly bizarre metaphors. I mean, the whole thing was just an utter and complete shambles. One of the craziest, most surreal debates I've ever seen. And as I said, and capping it all, we have a prime minister who comes along at the end of the debate and hints very broadly at a general election, and then a few minutes later basically says that she's going to hang on and press on. apparently with a plan to put the same deal that's been rejected now 3 times back to the House for a 4th time. So, I mean, we had a very bizarre situation. Now, if this deal had been passed today, we would have, I think, seen what Theresa May calls a Brexit, a fake Brexit, in my opinion, on the 22nd of May. Now, it's all completely uncertain. But the one thing that Donald Tusk, who is the president of the European Council, has said is that there's going to be another meeting of the European Council. That's the decision body, the highest decision body of the EU. On the 10th of April, the British must put forward a proposal before then. That proposal almost certainly, if there's going to be an extension of time, will require the British to participate in the European parliamentary elections, which the British up to now have been adamant that they would not do. And outside the House of Commons, we have the voice of Nigel Farage leading a large protest, which apparently grew bigger and bigger as the day progressed, and making it very clear that he was totally opposed to Theresa May's proposal, that he was going to campaign for a proper hard Brexit, and that if there are going to be European parliamentary elections with Britain involved, he will campaign vigorously in them with his new party, which is going to be called the Brexit Party. And I predict that he will make a big play in a general election if it comes within the next few weeks, as I think it may.
All right. I want you to get into Farage a little bit more and to get into UKIP as well, Alexander. What's the distinction, the difference between Farage and UKIP now, and how well you think they're going to do? But let's do a couple of super chats before you dive into that. Super chat from HB. If people rise up, will they do what we voted for? Very good, straightforward question. I don't think you're going to get the answer that you want, though.
Well, in Britain, we don't rise up, unfortunately. I mean, we don't do what people do in France, which is go and protest in the way that the Yellow Vests have been doing in France. That's not the British way. But if I may say, one should not underestimate the depth of anger that many people feel here in Britain. And it really depends, always in Britain, on political organisation. The reason for the crisis in which we are is because a majority of the people in a referendum voted to leave the EU. The British Parliament and the British political class, including the civil service, including the media, are frankly opposed to the whole idea. They see it as a nightmare. Partly because they also see it as an attack on them. So we have a situation where the people want one thing, the political class wants another. The only way you're going to get Brexit is if you change the political class. I think that there are the beginnings of something like that happening, not just with Nigel Farage's Brexit party, but you're beginning to see stirrings within both the Conservative and Labour parties. But I mean, it is going to be a long, hard road. But with 2/3 of British constituencies that return MPs to the House of Commons, voting heavily for leave in the referendum, I think that the emergence of a political force committed to seeing Brexit through is a certainty. The only question is, how long will it take?
Yeah, this is true. At the end of the day, it's the power does rest with the people, and
Exactly.
they can. It's going to be a long haul, but they can change things. That's
Which is
for
the
sure.
way things always happen in England. We don't do things like the French do
Right.
in an insurrectionary, revolutionary way, but it doesn't mean they don't happen. And I predict with complete confidence that one day they will.
Right. Excellent
And
question.
not perhaps so long.
Excellent question, HP.
Excellent question.
And from MG, we have another good question, which will lead us into UKIP as well, Alexander. So here's a super chat from MG. Alex, don't you think we must get ahead of the politicians? They choreographed the whole thing No deal off table was the turning point. We need UKIP. I completely agree with that sentiment.
Absolutely.
I think the whole thing was completely orchestrated and staged in order to keep the UK inside the EU. Alexander, what do you make of that question? And
Well,
go into UKIP and Nigel Farage as well.
yes, I mean, the questioner is absolutely right. I mean, Nigel Farage, and I've said this many times, the biggest mistake he made, I mean, one I don't understand, by the way, why he made it. I mean, I would like a coherent explanation from him of why he did it, was to resign from leadership of UKIP and to remove himself from British politics after the 2016 referendum. What he should have realised is that the referendum was only the first part of the battle. He won a big battle, but he had not won the war. And without him leading UKIP went into decline because no one who took over from him as leader of UKIP came anywhere close to matching either his charisma or his sheer political grasp. Now, what has unfortunately and tragically happened is that Nigel Farage has clearly had a major falling out with the people who took over UKIP after he went. He feels, perhaps correctly, I mean, I'm not an expert on UKIP politics, that UKIP has gone far further to the right than either he's comfortable with or than British voters would be comfortable with. And so he's given himself this gigantic Herculean task of creating an entirely new party, the Brexit Party, from the top down. Now, that is a huge challenge. And given how late it's been left and the situation we have in Britain now, one wonders how effective that's going to be in the short term. I don't have any doubt that the Brexit party, the new Brexit party, led by Nigel Farage, will be a far greater, stronger political force than what is left of UKIP will be. But far better if he'd remained in charge of UKIP, barking at the heels, biting at the heels of Conservative and Labour, and putting the fear of God into Conservative and Labour MPs over the last year, so that they would have said to themselves, we've got to press on with Brexit, because if we don't, UKIP, led by Nigel Farage, is going to win our seats from us, and we won't stay MPs for very long. That's what should have happened, and it didn't happen. And I have to say it, Nigel Farage bears a great responsibility for it.
He had the beast injured. He didn't kill it. He didn't drive a stake through the heart.
Correct. That's exactly right. I think he greatly underestimated the sheer resilience and bloody-mindedness, if I have to be frank, of the British establishment. I think he didn't understand.
And the EU establishment.
That they would,
and the Brussels
and the EU
establishment.
And the Brussels establishment. He didn't understand that winning a referendum, getting most people to vote, was not enough, and that this is an institution which, by definition, does not concern itself with democratic outcomes. We, the two of us, who know the situations in Greece and Cyprus, know better. But Nigel Farage, accustomed to a country, which is to say Britain, where votes matter, I don't think he could quite bring himself to get his mind around that.
Yeah, I lived it in Greece and I lived it in Cyprus, so I know how vicious the European Union can be. I mean, these guys play dirty and they play for keeps.
Absolutely. But I think he said to himself, the EU might be like that, but the British establishment is too committed to its parliamentary and democratic traditions to allow itself to be played that way. And how wrong he has proved to be.
All right. So we have May 4th. We have May a 4th vote. Is that
Well,
correct?
that's the likely that is the
Why
likeliest
is she doing a
prospect.
fourth vote if
Well,
they're already hinting at an election? Why is she
well,
going to go through this process? Like, what's the logic there?
I'm going to make a guess. I'm going to make a guess, which is I think she's going to say, she's saying to herself, the Conservative Party doesn't want an election, a general election, because it knows it's going to lose. I managed to reduce the number of Conservative MPs who voted against my deal to just 34. If I scare them this time with a general election, I might be able to drive that number down even more and perhaps get my deal passed. So I think that may be her calculation. Because I think Theresa May is personally still completely committed to that deal. Having said that, I come back to what I said. I think that the deal will fail on the fourth occasion because I
Is
suspect
this going to be the
some of the
same? Is
people.
this going to be the same setup, the split
Yeah,
deal?
yes, I think so. I
Okay.
think so. And again, I don't think I think it will be an indicative vote rather than a meaningful
What does
one
that mean?
because a non-binding
Non-binding.
one,
Okay.
a consultative vote,
Okay.
because that's the only way, it seems to me, to get around the Speaker's ruling. So we're going to have a fourth vote. I predict it will be defeated again by a bigger majority than the one we've just seen today. And I predict that what that will mean is that Theresa May will at that point resign because, or will call a general election. I think one of those two outcomes, and then whoever takes over, if she resigns, will ask the EU for an extension because it will have to be someone within the cabinet, and I think she will manoeuvre to make sure it's a Remainer. Or if there is a general election, and she leads the Conservatives into it, and it's impossible to see who else could lead the Conservatives into it, she would herself ask the EU for an extension. And then, as I said, we'd get a Jeremy Corbyn government at the end of that period, and it would make its proposal for a customs union. The EU would reject it, and as a result of the process that I outlined at the start of the programme, we would end up eventually with the revocation of Article 50.
If we go for an election, is it all but certain that the EU will grant that extension? I mean, is there
No,
anything
it is
that
not.
could push the EU, like we were talking
Right.
about Macron, who seems that
Yes.
he would like the UK out? Is there anything
Yes.
that could say, nah, we don't? There's no extension, even with the
I
general
think
election.
it's Yes, I think it is possible because there is a split within the EU. I mean, that's absolutely clear. So we have people like Macron and Michel Barnier, by the way, who was the person who negotiated this deal with Theresa May. They have made it, I think, fairly clear that they want to see Britain out of the EU as quickly as possible and are prepared to see a no-deal Brexit to achieve that. And can I explain again why? It's not because these people believe in no deal Brexits or have any great, principled belief in democratic outcome. It's because these are very, very hardline EU integrationists. They see Britain as a roadblock to pursuing the integrationist agenda that they have within the EU, which is intended to create a superstate there. So they want to be rid of Britain. They don't want British MPs, including Nigel Farage, in the European Parliament causing trouble there. And they would rather have a no-deal Brexit than have a situation where a very angry and aggrieved Britain remains in the EU and continues to sabotage their integrationist project. I don't think they are the majority. I think the leadership of the EU is still firmly in German hands. I think Angela Merkel would prefer to keep Britain in the EU in order partly to keep Macron and the integrationists in check, because there's now clearly a conflict between the Germans and the French. And I think that she would push for a long extension. And as always happens, her wishes would prevail.
Get it? get into the battle between Macron and Merkel, and even though they both believe in integrating Europe and creating a
Yeah,
super state, they both
yeah,
have very different approaches as to how to get there. So get into that a little bit because
yes,
that's directly related to how they're seeing Brexit and how they're seeing the UK.
absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I think the first thing to say is that, I mean, Merkel and the Germans have a much more German specific conception of the EU. I mean, they want to see the EU survive. They want it to become more integrationist. They want it, however, to be controlled by Germany because, from their point of view, this is not just a nationalist position. They don't want to pay bills for a huge integrationist experiment led by people who want to create a super state over which Germany doesn't have control. So the Merkel and the Germans want an integration which is controlled by Germany. Macron and the Brussels bureaucracy, by contrast, they want to see a stronger EU which is not just independent of the Germans, but which will to some extent control the Germans, so that the Germans aren't able to do things like they've just done with the Russians, for example, and sign up to things like Nord Stream 2, which the other integrationist leaders in the EU, like Macron, aren't happy with. So Macron wants to control the Germans and he wants to strengthen the EU to achieve that. Merkel wants a strengthened EU, but she wants Germany in charge. So that's the conflict between the two. On
Uh,
most on most issues, most of the time they agree, but sometimes on specific points, like the one we're seeing now, they disagree.
all right, we have a super chat from MG. Another quickie, please. All of Europe now knows what the EU is about: bullying, all out in the open. Will it take France or Germany to end it?
Um, that's a very good question, actually. First of all, I should say that, I mean, it's maybe all the EU knows it, but
I see
most
him in the
people, a
chat here.
lot
He
of,
says he also says AFD or Le Pen, which is
yeah,
a good little side
that's a good
comment.
point.
AFD or
Very,
Le
very
Pen.
good point. Or the, but I mean, if I may say, I mean, a lot of people, of course, have already known it. I mean, you know, ask people in Italy, ask people in Greece, ask people in Cyprus, ask people in Spain. A lot of people have seen it. I think people in Britain now see it too. A lot of people in Britain see it too. But essentially, the questioner is right. I don't know how it's all going to end, but certainly the Germans and the French are at the core of the system. And it's important to stress that most people in France and most people in Germany do not benefit from it. Some people do, but more and more people in those two countries don't benefit from it. That's why you see the growth of parties like Marine Le Pen's in France, Jean-Luc Mélenchon's from the left in France. Also, he's also anti-EU. He's taking an anti-EU position from the left side, and you see the rise of the yellow vests. And of course, in Germany, as the viewer correctly says, we've also seen the AfD rise. So I would regard these things as symptoms of a major crisis within the EU system. It is true that if there is a breakdown in Germany or France, the whole project ends. But there are other countries that will probably have a pivotal role also. Italy being the obvious one, with the third biggest economy in the EU after Germany, or at least the Eurozone, after Germany and France, and the second biggest industrial sector, and with the ability to blow up the entire European financial system. Spain is also a big country also, and we have the Visegrad states, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Slovakia, with their de facto leader Orban. We have the Austrians, we have Poland too. So there's lots of discontent in many places, and at some point I suspect all of that will come together.
I have a question about Corbyn. If it goes to an election and Corbyn does win,
Mm.
is Corbyn not? He's a pretty astute politician. I mean, he's a career politician. Is he not afraid that if he does revoke Article 50 and he goes against the will of the people, that he'll go down in history as doing such? I mean, does he not understand that he could? Theresa May's kind of passing the ball off to him, saying, okay, I did a crappy job, but you know what? You're now the prime minister. You have to deal with it. And I know where you're going to take it. You're going to revoke Article 50. I mean, does he grasp that concept?
I think he grasps it very well. I think he is by no means a stupid man, and he's got some people around him who are extremely clever and who are advising him and who are pointing this out to him. Corbyn, in addition, I should say, has always been very critical of the EU, and in his, through most of his career, has been strongly hostile to it. I think in the core of his being, he would not be sorry to see a no-deal Brexit. Jeremy Corbyn's major problem is that he is surrounded by a Labour Party whose parliamentary membership and whose rank and file membership is fervidly pro-EU. And I think he feels that if he takes that kind of position of standing out against these people, that he will jeopardize his prospects of leading Labour to victory in an election, because he would precipitate a massive split in his party. I think that is the wrong calculation. I think he should be very clear that Labour will support a Brexit position. I think that if he were to do that, I think he would win more votes than he lost. But I do understand the political pressures on him. It is the reverse of Tsipras. Tsipras had a party, or at least a support in Greece that was willing to take a harder line than he was. And in Labour politics, Corbyn, I suspect, would be willing to take a harder line, but his party won't let him.
All right. Let's get to some more super chats. Thank you, Wardy Boy 69 for your super chat. From Boundless Energy. If one think about the possible option of a war with Russia, God forbid, does it make a lot of sense for the UK to leave the EU in order to regain control of the continent and push its own economic rules? So
right.
Bringing Russia into the mix, Alexander.
Yeah, well, let me express an opinion, which I expressed, by the way, recently. Well, not so recently, but a couple of months ago, in a mammoth article about British attitudes to Russia on Consortium News. There's a link to it on our website, on our site. I think that a post-Brexit Britain not only would have a good reason to have good relations with Russia, but it is in a very, very strong position, if it did that, to benefit massively. Because the one thing Russia lacks in developing the Russian economy is investment capital. And Britain is the investment capital of Europe. So it's an obvious marriage between the biggest financial centre in Europe, which is Britain, and the most productive economy in Europe, which is Russia. But of course, it's almost at the moment, because we are in such a grip of anti-Russian feeling in Britain at the present time that anybody who makes that sort of point is simply not going to be listened to. I think that if Britain leaves the EU, it has all kinds of options. It has both security options. I don't personally think there's any kind of danger with Russia, at least not one where Britain is concerned. I think Russia is any sort of threat to Britain. But I think Britain could play a productive role, an independent Britain could play a productive role developing a good relationship with Russia, forging good economic links, restarting a political dialogue. I think it would be easier for Britain to do that, much easier than it would if it remained within the EU, because so long as it remains within the EU, it is subject to EU sanctions against Russia and can't get round them. And those sanctions are not dictated by British interests, but by American and German ones.
All right, and a super chat from Penguins also on Russia. What would Russia be saying about this Brexit mess? So what do you think's going through the mind of Putin and the Kremlin right now?
I don't think they're particularly interested. Actually, I mean, as far as they're concerned, Britain is this extremely hostile country that they have basically given up on, and from their point of view, the more trouble and chaos in Britain, well, the better. But Britain doesn't matter to Russia at the moment so much. If Britain changed its policies towards Russia and started pursuing the sort of policies that I said it should, then that would be a different story entirely. But at this present moment in time, for the Russians, the country that matters above all is Germany, because that's their major economic and political partner in Europe. And dare I say, increasingly Italy, whose government has made it very clear that it wants to develop good relations with Russia. The country that is watching Brexit with utter confusion and horror is China, which has far bigger investments in Britain than Russia does. And I should say that Britain, in the EU, in Europe, is far and away the biggest recipient of Chinese investment. So the Chinese are much more interested in what is going on in Britain with Brexit than the Russians are. That's that's not just my belief. That's something I am pretty sure about, both from following what the Russians and the Chinese are saying about these things, and from talking about this subject with Chinese, with people who are Chinese people who are in the know.
All right, and another super chat from Mech 1164 with the sentiment in the UK. How could Corbyn win? Wouldn't Boris be more likely?
Well, I don't know. I mean, the problem with the problem a Boris Johnson leadership of the Conservative Party has is, first of all, we must remember that there are an awful lot of Remainers within the British electorate. I mean, they lost by 48%, but they had 48%. That actually slightly overstates their support because it includes Northern Ireland, which isn't really a part of the party political process in the same way that other parts of the United Kingdom are, because the Conservative and Labour parties don't field candidates in Northern Ireland. But let's say there's 45% of the electorate who are not going to vote for Boris under any circumstances. And some of those traditionally are Conservatives. There's about 20% of Conservative voters or traditional Conservative voters who vote Remain, and they might find it difficult to support Boris. But beyond that, we have to remember that the Conservative Party, if Boris led it, might split. I mean, there are several Conservative MPs and leaders who basically said that they will not remain in the Conservative Party if Boris Johnson leads it. So we would have a divided party, a party that was splitting and losing support going into that election. Whether Boris would be able to mobilize enough people, enough Leave-minded people, to make up the difference, I don't know. I think, my guess is that he wouldn't. And I think a lot of Leave-minded people are not going to trust him after his vote for Theresa May's deal today. And I predict if we did get a Boris-led Conservative Party, Boris Johnson-led Conservative Party, I think Nigel Farage and the Brexit Party would be out there in every constituency reminding people that Boris Johnson, when it came to it, voted for Theresa May's deal, which he had said was slavery, which he had said was a vassal state, which he had said was Brexit in name only.
Alexander, I want your thoughts as to the speech that Donald Tusk gave to the EU the other day, where he said, he basically told the UK, the MPs, how dare you go against, the people that want to remain in the EU? How dare you go against everyone that, I think 4 million people that signed, or 2 million that signed an online petition? How dare you go against all these people? How dare you go against the million people that assembled out, that got out onto the streets and protested? What do you make of Tusk as a man, and what do you make of that speech that he gave?
I'm not going to comment on Donald Tusk as a man because whatever I said would land me into trouble. But can I say about his comments? What it shows for me is a point that I made many times, which is for people like Donald Tusk, there's only one set of people that that matter and whom he recognises as people, and those are the people who support the EU project. No, everyone else is apparently not people, not a person at all. And I thought it was an absolutely shocking set of comments that Donald Tusk made. And to me, it shows quite clearly that Donald Tusk is working towards a revocation of Article 50. That is clearly his objective. I think it's also Angela Merkel's objective.
All right, and we have a super chat from Boundless Energy. This is your dog speaking, Alexander. Alexander, you are finally home and can spend some time with me, but you prefer to speak to a stupid computer screen. Love your dog. That's what your dog is telling you.
I speak to my dog very often. In fact, I've got two. But the other one, this is the sister, is very shy, or at least she's shyer. She doesn't join in our programs, but she's always here. In fact, she's not far away at the moment, and she listens very carefully to all we say.
All right. What's Merkel thinking now? What's Merkel's next move?
I think that Merkel always plays these games very carefully, and actually I have to give her credit for this, very skillfully. I think she's going to wait and see what Theresa May...
She played this one well, huh?
Well, absolutely. She always does. I mean, within grand European politics, Angela Merkel, who is a person with great political skills, I've said many critical things about her, which I'm not taking back, but I've always recognised her very great skill as an EU politician. I think she's going to wait and see, and then she's going to manipulate or use whatever situation arises to maximum advantage. So she's going to wait and see what Theresa May comes up with next week. She's going to wait and see what the British Parliament votes on in this further group of indicative votes on Monday. She's going to be talking quietly, as she always does, to those people within the EU system like Tusk and Juncker, who, as I said, always do what she wants. And she's going to be quietly mobilising the various other EU countries in order to contain Macron. So I think she will be moving towards an extension of Brexit beyond the 12th of April. I think she'll be focused on the EU Council meeting on that day. And I think she will be working towards a situation where I think the British are told that the only real solution to this thing is a general election with the outcome that I said.
All right, a super chat from MG. Great point on Tusk. The UK does not miss these details and has a long memory. Trust me, the next election will be carnage for main parties. Do you agree with that?
Yes, I absolutely do agree with that. I mean, perhaps the one point of difference I will make is I think that the probability is, simply because there isn't very much time to organise fully, that if there is a general election within the next couple of weeks, it will be a Labour win with a majority. I'm not sure how big a majority, and I wouldn't, by the way, say that was a completely certain outcome. But especially if Article 50 is revoked, the election after that will result in exactly the outcome that the questioner says, because I think a lot of people in Britain are going to be extremely angry over what has happened.
Outside of UKIP and Farage's party, what other parties do you see that could gain ground on the mishaps of the Tories and Labour?
But I think I think the other thing to always look at, and I think this is an important point to make, is that there would be a crisis within the Conservative Party. And when I say a crisis, I would expect after this debacle, there would be a huge push by the party's membership to finally gain control of the leading heights, or the commanding heights of the Conservative Party, and put a solid pro-leave Brexiter finally in charge of the party. So I would guess that come the next election, I mean, not this one, but perhaps the one after, you would see a pro-Brexit Conservative leader leading a Conservative Party on a hard Brexit, no deal Brexit platform. One's concern is that, of course, politicians in mainstream parties say as candidates that they will do one thing, then they get elected and become prime minister, and they do something else, which is why Nigel Farage and his Brexit party need to still be there.
All right, Alexander. We're about 55 minutes in. Let's go for another 5 minutes. What's next? What's next, Alexander, moving forward?
Right, okay. I think the first thing that's got to happen is we've got to see what happens this weekend, because, as I said, Theresa May is digging in. She's talking about remaining prime minister. She's talking about whether, bringing this thing forward for a fourth time next week. We will see whether the cabinet, the government, the rest of the government, allows her to do that. I would remind you of a point I've made many times. The weekend is when MPs in Britain go back to their constituencies, talk to their local parties. You can be sure that many people in those parties are now incandescent, and many of them may be pushing for Theresa May to go. So it's not a foregone conclusion that she will survive this weekend and that she will be able to go forward with this fourth vote next week. The other thing that's due to happen, which is on Monday, is we're going to have the same round of indicative votes that we had on Wednesday. Those are indicative votes in which various people put forward various proposals on how Brexit should be taken forward. None of them are legally binding, but the intention appears to be to show to the government what would have the most support in the House of Commons. I have been deeply sceptical of that process all along. I said before the vote on Wednesday that I didn't think it meant anything, and that the reports about Parliament taking control should not be taken seriously. The indicative votes on Wednesday amounted to nothing, and I personally think the indicative votes on Monday will amount to nothing. But nonetheless, they may give a straw in the wind, and they may be used by some of the leaders, Corbyn perhaps, or whoever is still in charge of the Conservatives on Monday, as some sort of route forward. If they can't agree, or if they come up with a proposal which Macron and the EU hardliners won't accept, we will know on the 10th of April. But I predict that the most likely outcome is that at some point before the 10th of April, a vote of confidence will pass and a general election will be called in order, as I said, to try and break the impasse and pass the buck onto Jeremy Corbyn and pave the way eventually for Article 50 to be revoked and for Brexit to be cancelled. But that seems to me the most likely route forward. There is an outside chance, and it's not one we should completely discount, that Macron and his people will dig in their heels and we will get a no-deal Brexit on the 12th of April. If that does happen, it will be a huge blow to the political class in Britain, and it will be a further proof that Angela Merkel's rule over the EU is ending.
All right.
But we shall see.
We shall see. Okay, and we'll finish it out with this last super chat from Leslie White. Alex, this is for your dogs by the Babone. It's £5. So Alex from Leslie, super chat to get your dogs.
I buy them lots. Thank you very much, and I'm very grateful, and so will they be.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for tuning in to this live. Thank you for your super chats. Thank you for your questions. Smash that like button. Share that channel with everybody you know. Of course, go to the Duran shop, pick up a t-shirt. That really helps us out. And you can also donate to us on PayPal and Patreon. The link is in the description box down below as well, or I will put it in the description box down below when this chat wraps up. Thank you to everybody for tuning in. We will keep our pulse, our eyes on this story, Alexander, as we have done all along.
Absolutely, all along.
Thank you, Lewis, for your super chat as well. Get both of your dogs up on. All right, another £4.99 and the £5. All right, thank you, Lewis. I need to get a dog so I can start getting some of these super chats.
You should indeed, Alex. I strongly recommend it. When I'm working late into the night, they're also great company.
All right. Okay, great. Thank you very much, everybody. Take care. Have a good evening or morning, afternoon, wherever you are.